the Thursdays with Third Path Live podcast. On every episode, you will meet thought leaders, role models, and change agents connected to the Third Path community. All season long, we are exploring how you can become a work care champion for yourself, your family, and your aging loved ones. Hi, I'm Jessica Ruth, Third Path founder. And if you're inspired what you're hearing today, please share our podcast with someone you know so we can keep our community of change agents and role models growing. And let me tell you a little bit more about our special guest today and give you a big picture look at what we'll be discussing. First, you'll be hearing from Greg Beecher. He's the Director of Talent Development at Virginia Tech. He became a hybrid champion as a result of the pandemic. It's a great story you're going to enjoy hearing. He's also the parent of 4 children, ages 9 through 18. Next, after we've heard from Greg, we'll hear from Adrienne Udarbe. Another wonderful story. She's the founder and executive director of Pinnacle Prevention. And when she founded her organization over 10 years ago, she started it as a fully remote workplace. A workplace that supported people to work hybrid, fully remote, on-site. You'll see she's really created a very flexible workplace. She's the parent of 2 children, ages 17 and 23. She's also caring for an aging parent, which anybody who's doing that knows it adds some extra flexibility challenges. All right, I'm going to show you a couple slides and then it'll help us get the big picture of today's event. There's kind of 2 things we need to think about if we want to create high-performing hybrid workplaces. One is we can change where and when we work, and that's a big part of what we'll be talking about today. But if you're someone who wants to be a work care champion, meaning have time for work and care in your life, we also need to be thoughtful about how much we work. And often we feel like that overflowing glass of water where between our work responsibilities and life responsibilities, it feels like just too much to do. At Third Path, we teach people about the concept of a triple win solution for these 2 issues. You need to look for a solution that's good for you, but you also need to look for a solution that's good for the work you do and your organization's priorities. And here's the one that sometimes people don't think about. It needs to also be a solution that's good for the people you work with, whether those are your colleagues or clients. And as I was preparing for today's event, I was thinking about that there's some organizations that have a lot of opportunity for flex. And I'm going to show you one more slide where there are some organizations that have less opportunity for flex. And we are really in a period of time when people are trying to sort this out. So I'm trying to use today as an opportunity to give you some contextual ideas around this, but then give you 2 stories that help illustrate this as well. So I think what we're going to hear from Adrienne's story is that it's an organization where most of the work is fairly independent of each other. And so people really can choose whether they want to work remotely or on-site, and it can really reflect their personal preferences. And what Adrienne will share is that it changes over the course of the life cycle. She shared a number of different stories about how her staff have changed their solution over time, including one dad who really figured out a solution that would change kind of the winter schedule and the summer schedule. So there really is a lot of opportunity for flex and even more opportunity in organizations that have a lot of flexibility in them. But as I have in that asterisk explained, that some jobs are more coordinated where you have to work at the same time as some of your colleagues, whether that's remote or on-site. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So there's a number of leaders we work with who work in organizations that are more of an apprentice style job. So, a law firm, an architect firm, these are apprentice style jobs. Someone's getting a graduate degree, they come and start working at that organization, but really it takes 2 to 4 or 5 years for that person to really learn that job, that be apprenticed in that particular type of work. This is a job that requires a lot more coordination, a type of job. What I'm seeing is some of these organizations are struggling because in the past, everybody was on site and it was very easy to imagine this apprentice work happening everybody was there Monday through Friday. It was an easy thing for people to have that institutional goal met of growing the next generation of leaders. But I'm seeing some of these organizations struggling because what was used to be almost invisible work happening around apprenticeship work, be it being on site, has shifted now in a hybrid workplace. And they have a lot of their newer employees on site, but because of the life cycle issues, their more seasoned employees are working off-site and remotely because they've got kids at home. And they're struggling to kind of figure out how to get this apprentice model working in a hybrid workplace. I know there's answers, but I just wanted to point out how when we think about work and flexibility, we need to really think about the type of job you have or the type of task you do. Here's the good news. If you're listening in today and you are one of our work care champions, you are one of the best assets for your organization to figure out great solutions around flexibility, because you've already kind of been on that maze where there's been twists and turns and pitfalls of trying to make it work. So you really know about how to stay the course and think in outside the box ways around your work and life goals. So don't forget, you bring a lot to your organization to think smart. And the one way to do this, and we'll talk more about it today, is to approach conversations with the 3 C's. When you're trying to get more flexibility, be curious, compassionate, and courageous, and you'll find some great answers. Greg, so glad you're here. It was really fun meeting you the first time and hearing about how the pandemic really created a change for you around your approach to work. Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. You know, back in March of 2020, where we all thought the pandemic was going to last a couple of weeks, I sent my team home. And at that point, I was the director of human resources for one of our divisions at Virginia Tech. And what I didn't know was going to unfold was a journey for not just myself, but looking at how I helped others really through that process. I was responsible for a division that really had a lot of workforce that could not go remote to be able to maintain operations, and many that did. And that struggle became, I think, a stretching point for many leaders to figure out what worked. But I started to kind of reflect on that for myself as we went through that. And I learned a lot to be able to help me consider what was best for me. And so fast forward then to July of last year, where I became the director of talent development. Our team was still coming back into this kind of realization, but we have a vice president who is very keen on remote work and making that a priority for our workforce. And so for our team, we were able to look at what that looks like. Now, I have clients of all kinds across our university that we work with. And that was something that I saw, how do we work with them? How do we be able to do that in-person work? Because sometimes it's not through Zoom or through some kind of a webinar activity. So what we did was we really worked out a schedule. And I went back to some training I had probably about 15 to 20 years ago through one of our state leadership programs. And I remembered there was at that point a priority by our governor to have X% of our workforce working remote. And I thought, well, then they were able to do this. So there's something that we can be able to do as well. Well, what that really looked like was an idea of flexing our time to be able to say, all right, we're going to be remote. For myself, I'm remote 2 days a week, and I'm on site 3 days a week. But that changes. There's a standard of Monday through Wednesday, I'm on site, Thursday, Friday, but that changes. That has been an amazing experience for me because for my family, one of the things that happened was we actually moved in 2021. We had been looking for someplace a little more out in the country, if you will. And we found something, and it was actually farther away from my workplace than it was where we were living before. That became possible because I was working remote 2 days a week. Now, there's far more to the benefits of where we located than just that, but it was an amazing experience. And I found with my team, one of the things that we're able to do is to really connect. Sometimes we've been connecting on Zoom meetings, which makes it easier for us to go over shared documents and resources and ideas because we're working on a project for a client, and getting in the room isn't just as feasible because, well, the resources are all online for us to consider. So there's just been many, many benefits to it. And that's just a start. So where would you like to go from
Wonderful.
here?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. And again, I think the thing I want to underscore is you were a leader who saw that this was good for your team, but you also saw that you were really enjoying it yourself. And that's a theme that's going to come up over and over again today, because I think we're seeing some leaders retreat from this.
Yes,
And I think that maybe they were holding their breath during the pandemic to get back to the office. And so
agreed.
what we're going to be talking about in the town hall discussion is how do we help make some change for those teams where they're facing leaders who are maybe kind of going backwards in their thinking. So good to have somebody who's had their eyes opened and seen the benefits with us. I know that one of the big things we need to think about when we create these hybrid workplaces is creating a culture of connection. And
Yes.
you are just, in my opinion, intuitively smart about some of the ways you did that. So tell us a little bit about how you've really fostered a connection within your team.
Well, I appreciate that. So a couple of different things. We do a weekly meeting, whether we're in the office or not, through Zoom. That's our actually it's a bi-weekly meeting that we do. And then once a month, we do a half-day strategy session that's in person. We try to do something outside of our immediate office complex. We use Microsoft Teams to be able to manage a lot of our resources, our files, and interacting from there. So chat function through that gives us some feasibility to feel like it's real time. And in fact, even within the Office suite, we're using that to be able to help engage. I've found that over the course of the pandemic and beyond, having fun on Zoom is still feasible as much as it is in person. And I think that's been a very huge priority for us to be able to make sure that we're doing that. So connection is not just about how we're managing the business of what we're doing. It's also about the connections. And so we start out with at our Zoom meetings, we start out with a gratitude, or sometimes I'll throw in a question for them because, just get curiosity out there for them to be able to engage and have some fun. And, oh, I didn't realize that during the pandemic, I know many people did the show and tell. I met more pets and kids over the pandemic than I ever would have if I had not been remote, and I know others have as well. And so there's just it's about the interpersonal relationship as much as it is about the business relationship of sharing those resources and experiences.
Yeah, and again, Greg, I think there's something exceptional that you knew to do, which is it is that interpersonal, and you can do it virtually. And it sounds like you guys have succeeded in it virtually. And there is something about physically getting together. What are you
Right.
noticing about the importance of physically getting together too? How has that been different and important?
It's been interesting from the standpoint that there were some initially, when we're coming back into the workplace, that they were reluctant. But those individuals who do want a remote schedule, I mean, and what I'm saying they want a remote, they would actually like to relocate to another city and work from there. That may come in time, but the reality is that what we found is they're the ones speaking up saying, hey, I think these meetings need to be in person versus me having to ask for that. And so that's been a valuable piece. And what I will also say is, in fact, this coming Monday, I'm hosting my team at my house. And I gave them three options. Would you like to go find a conference room on campus? Would you like to go find something here in the immediate area? Or would you like to come to my house and I'll fix you lunch? And without hesitation, they said, let's go to your house and you fix lunch. So that's what I'm doing and preparing for that right now. So it's been a very valuable place for us to, I think, become a stronger team because of that in-person and remote practice.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to emphasize for anybody who's listening in today, we've been virtual for next year's our 25th anniversary. And we always knew we still had to get physically together because there's just we're human. And there's something about physically being in a room together that's just very different than even the fun that you can create through a remote experience. One
Agreed.
of the one of the challenges, Greg, and again, you've had some good ideas around this, is um, remote work can start spilling into our lives and taking up more of our time. There's less of a boundary of leaving the workplace. Um, how have you helped yourself and your employees, your team think about that?
Yeah, great question. Uh, you know, Prior to our move, so I'll speak about myself first. Prior to our move, I had a corner of a room in the house that was my designated workspace. Still had kids and dogs and family walking through the space many times, but nonetheless, it was a designated space. when we relocated, I was able to, we were able to actually create a office for me that is a closed off space from the rest of the world of the Beecher household. And what I know is that that's been significant because I can walk through a door and be able to make a change. I know that's not feasible for everyone. And so the boundaries have to look different for every person. For my team, and for myself, being mindful, if I'm getting an email, I literally at the bottom of my email, someone shared a message several years ago that says something to the effect of, I respect your time and your well-being, and you do not need to respond to this if I'm sending this after normal business hours. So communicating that, I think, is an important value. And likewise with my team, if I'm getting that a lot late night activity from them, weekend activity, that's something I'm then having a conversation with them and say, hey, why was this coming at 2 a.m? And some people have just a little different sleep patterns, and that's okay. But I don't want them to be working at 2 a.m. either, even if they're choosing to do that. So those tough conversations sometimes are necessary, and not tough in a disciplinary or punitive manner, but in an accountability, which is what I'm really trying to help instill.
Yeah.
I think it's just a good practice for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think that you just have done a lot of things that we encourage leaders to think about very smartly. One of the worries, in addition to this kind of sense of community and connection that you're doing so well, there are some leaders that worry about, well, how do you know what people are doing and are they getting their work done? What have you learned around helping the team understand they're
Yeah.
focused on the right work, they're not overworking? How do you work with the team around this in a virtual way?
Keyword is trust. And if I can't trust my team in the office, then I'm not going to be able to trust them outside or vice versa. And so it really starts with me. What is it that I'm feeling a lack of trust about? If I'm projecting that on the other person, then I have an issue that says it's them, not me, when in fact, a trust is a two-way street. I think it's imperative for me to be able to also work with my team on those deadlines and expectations. And I try to tell, I just hired a new team member. One of the things I always do in the onboarding conversations is, look, I know that for me, I can fall victim to forgetting to communicate some of the expectations to a project, such as, hey, I need this on Friday or I need this 2 months from now. So I need you to help keep me accountable to that, which is part of the building the trust. I also will use our strategy sessions to be able to help them say, this is where I think we need to go, but for them to then give input about how do we hold one another accountable to that? What's the expectation? I have a team of high performers. That's atypical in some situations, but many people who have that kind of a team can feel like they trust them more. I know that as a division director for HR, I was having to have a lot of conversations with managers who did not trust their team members. And so engaging them with their team members is what we had to try to get them to do, and to be able to figure out, well, what does that look like? And if you truly are having doubts, well, there's sometimes ways that we could actually demonstrate that. We could go into the system and track the kind of work, because that was the type of project work they were doing. But there's a number of different mechanisms, but trust is really the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. And I like your question about trust is a two-way street. So is it something I'm bringing to the problem? Is it something that I'm really picking up on that needs to be addressed? And this is going to be the truth when people are working on site or in a hybrid way. Wow, this has been great. And so I asked you one question when you made this big change. I said, so Greg, has this impacted your family? Tell us a little bit about whether this has impacted your family, this change.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked me that question, Jessica, because I actually had to pause and go ask my kids and my wife. And my oldest son, who kind of responded like, well, I think maybe. I mean, but he's a teenage boy that I wasn't expecting a whole lot of thematic thinking there. But when I asked my wife, there was a very emphatic, absolutely, it has been better. And I said, all right, tell me more. What are you seeing? She goes, I can see a difference. My commute time is actually longer now because of our move than what it was before the pandemic. But I'm able to do that because overall it's about the same, because I'm only commuting 3 days a week. In that, she can tell, even with that downtime through the driving, that I am in a different mindset when I come out of my office working remote compared to when I walk through the door after an hour's drive.
Mhm.
It's part of what she sees, and she sees the convenience, is what she also said, because with 4 kids, life happens a lot. And sometimes I need to step in to help with whether it's a sick kid, someone forgot lunch, getting them to a doctor's appointment. And there is a little more convenience because I literally can be on a call in my car while I'm taking a kid to a doctor's appointment. And my team, my division is okay with that because it's part of our cultural practice.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful, Greg. We're going to switch to Adrienne in a second, but my memory is, if I'm correct, that therefore your team kind of works, sometime you work kind of normal business hours, 3 days on site, and rest of your team probably works some combination of on site or off site, but still kind of normal business hours is kind of the unless there's the occasional working nights or weekends because they need to or something like that.
That's correct.
Okay, cool. Because what you guys are going to hear in a second is when we switch to Adrienne, is there's another example out there of an organization that's doing really differently. And in part is because it's a different kind of work. So thanks, Greg. Let's hear from Adrienne
Absolutely.
next. Welcome, Adrienne. I am really excited to have your story told as well. You were introduced to me by someone who I really care a lot about as a really exceptional example of flexibility. And one reason I think she was thinking that was because you were doing this so many years ago. So you have a story about maybe whichever way you want to tell it, why you founded your organization in such a flexible way, or how flexible your organization is. Where would you like to begin, Adrienne? I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me, and happy to start with why it was founded in the way that it was. My background is in public health. I've been in public health for over 2 decades. And prior to my role here with Pinnacle Prevention and founding this organization, I worked at the state health department. And at that time, my children were very young. And it was surprising and actually unique and innovative at the time for our state health department that we did have here in Arizona to have an infinite work policy. And at the time when I had started with them, my son was an infant and I was able to bring him to work with me. And that felt like such a treasure and a gift that I didn't even know could possibly exist. And it stayed with me in my soul forever. And I knew that this was something that all new parents should be able to experience. And so with that, I wanted to make sure that wherever I ended up in my future path, that was embedded in part of who we are and what we do. And with that, I also saw the other side of sometimes there's policies that look really good on paper, but the humans that are trying to implement them maybe don't do so with as much compassion and care as we need. So my kind of goal and mission in starting Pinnacle Prevention was to be able to have this flexible, family-friendly environment that was both a good policy on paper and actually something that was implemented with care and compassion with an understanding of the reality of what it just means to be a working parent.
Yeah. And I think that's the theme. When we get to that town hall discussion, it's like what you really see in Greg and Adrienne's story is that personal connection to this issue themselves has made them the champions to create these workplaces and work teams that are doing things so differently. And Adrienne, think about that. Like you're creating a whole generation of workplaces that support people to be able to have a life, and how that is the future we want to reach for and hold on to, and encourage people today to listen into and continue to figure out how they can make this happen in their lives. One of the things I was so impressed with when I listened to your story was how differently everybody seems to work and how relaxed you are about this real diversity of the ways people work. Tell us a little bit about that so the listeners can better understand that diversity.
Yeah, so we're a team of 12 and we're a statewide serving organization. So our work takes us all over the state all the time. And we have about half of our team that lives in the southern part of the state and half of our team that lives in the central part of the state. We have one primary central headquarters office in the central part of the state. But since the beginning, we've always had a hybrid, flexible work environment because humans are human, and we know some folks like that ability to be able to work from home and need that flexibility, and others want that time to connect. And sometimes we want both of both worlds as well too. We want days when we can be connected with our coworkers and thought partnerships, and we have other days when we need some quiet solitude as well. So we have that flexibility where we have team members working many different days, many different hours. Our work by nature is tightly connected to farmers markets, which typically operate here on weekends. So we have a lot of folks that are operating and working on weekends and need flexibility in hours that way. We also have some folks that are just night owls and prefer to work a little bit more at night and do their best creative work at night. And we want that creativity. So that's something that we honor and we like to see as well.
Yeah, yeah, I was really struck by there's probably nobody in your office working a similar schedule, and that the schedule could be across the whole week or and include the evening hours, and could shift because you really were saying there wasn't something you didn't even really want a standard schedule
Um,
from people. And again, those who are listening in today, this isn't to say there's one right way. It's to help us open our eyes and see there's many different ways. And in part is connected to the type of work we do. I had to tell you, when I first listened to your story, I was thinking about that leader at that apprentice workplace and realizing he would not relate to your story at all because his work that they do in this organization is so very different. And it's not right or wrong. We need to get smart about, given the work we do, the type of jobs, the type of task, that we might adopt something different. You mentioned quiet focus work. I want to talk about that for a second. And then I want to give a couple of examples of this flexibility and how it's played out at your workplace. One of the things, when we get to that point where we're saying advocating for what works well for you, turns out when we work from our home offices or a coffee shop, we can do that quiet focus work better. And so what you're really doing, Adrienne, is you're encouraging people to think about, what am I trying to get done today? What's the best physical space to get that work done? Does that sound like I'm describing it accurately, what's going on?
Absolutely. A lot of our work and our is writing grants and writing, and it needs that creative thinking and that analytical thinking. And so we've also had team members that say, I do my best grant writing, for example, in the morning. And so I'm going to block out this time in the morning so I can have focused writing time then. And then I'm going to schedule all my meetings for the afternoon. And so we've been really talking a lot with each other as a team as to when our best times are, how we could block and use our calendar in that way to take advantage of that. It's something that has helped folks, they have stated, feel less stressed when they know that they're up against a deadline or trying to get something done, that they can have that quiet focus time rather than maybe getting pulled in many different directions if we were all in the office together.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, last year we had a guy on who talked about creating 4-day work weeks. And this is exactly what they started working on, was if we all want to reduce how many hours we're working to 4 days, let's be more intentional about how we use our time. And they did just what you're talking about. They had kind of certain parts of the day that were blocked for quiet focus time, and then other parts of the day for meetings, and everybody became much more efficient. So we're trying to give you some tips as you listen in for how you can advocate for this and why it's going to make sense for you to keep on reaching for your hybrid goal, if it's that triple win. So one of the things you've done also is figure out, okay, I can have all this diversity of schedules, but people still like to get together. How have you solved that?
Yeah, our team connects with each other in person once a month, and we connect over food because our work is centered around food. So that is what makes sense to us. And we know that food connects us and brings us together. So every month we have a themed potluck. So we're each bringing in a different dish. And it's also really fun to explore things around the theme, to say, oh, I tried something new, or I ended up calling my grandma and I got this really cool recipe for this that I'm really excited to share with all of you, which is really beautiful. And so that time is really cherished and special. And what we've heard from folks is, like, if, for example, they happen to be sick on that day and they have to call me and say, oh, hey, I'm sick, I can't make it. The first thing typically they say is, I'm so disappointed. I always look forward to these meals and to these monthly lunches together.
Yeah, yeah. So listening in, remember, hybrid doesn't mean we become disconnected from each other. We just find different ways to connect because as human beings, to do our work best, it really makes a difference for us to feel that sense of community. And I'm not surprised that people really liked going to those potluck lunches. And I loved your point too, that, I think, if people aren't up to it, keep it simple, bring what you can. It was a really very inclusive, accepting approach. No surprise.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say is I think you've done a really great job of creating a place that's very good for parents. You have good parental leave. You were talking about a dad who came back who was able to talk about how his wife's job was X and his job was Y. Tell me more about how you help parents manage that beginning stage of parenthood when it's kind of hard to make it all work.
Yeah, we offer 16 weeks of paid parental leave. And that feels really important to us because if we're in the business of health, we know that health starts there and how important and critical that is. And that's for any parent or caregiver. And most recently, we just had a dad that just returned from parental leave, and his spouse is a teacher. And so he was talking about the flexibility and the importance of during the summer when his spouse is not teaching, having more flexibility with the children then. But then when the school year gets kicked off and going, how he needs to have more flexibility to support her at that time. And so just being mindful of it's not one size fits all, and being mindful of the partners' different roles that they play and the different ages of the kids, and the juggling act of it all becomes really critical and important. But I think the power of him modeling that as well out in the community and with others. So we just had a big partner meeting at our office, and he was there wearing the baby and had the baby. And just to see the joy on different folks' faces when they would come and enter the building and they would see the baby is pretty magical. And especially to see that it's a shared responsibility, regardless of what your role is in the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that came up when we were first interviewing was this whole idea that you've made it very transparent. People are whole people.
Mhm.
They have work they want to do excellent job at. They have care, whether that's children, young, older, aging parents, communities that they want to be involved with and care for. And what you have done is created this transparency that people bring their whole selves to work. And I would imagine that transparency is some of the secret sauce for why what you're doing works so well. You've made it very safe for people to be whole people. What do you think is going on that's made that possible?
I think we've come from a past experience where folks say leave it at the door, and we very much kind of buck that thinking, and that because you never leave it at the door. If you just happen to have a hard morning and your kiddos didn't want to get dressed, or something happened, or you had a flat tire on the way to school, you don't leave those things at the door. You're bringing it in with you. And so to us, it's been really important to make sure that we're supporting our team as one family, to say, wow, that sounds really hard that you had to experience that today. What might I be able to do to help you? Can I bring you some food? What does that look like? I think when we're accepting of folks' whole selves, and it's something that I want for myself as well, too. As you mentioned at the beginning, I'm taking care of aging parents. I want that flexibility and that care and that compassion for myself just as much as we want it for the entire team. I think then at the end of the day, you have just a healthier sense of well-being amongst your workforce and your team.
Yeah, yeah, it's really wonderful, Adrienne. So what's going to come next is for us to talk a little bit about kind of the big picture about what we've been learning today. But as you can already see, Adrienne, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful and inspirational workplace that you've created. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you who's coming up next. We're going to do what we call a 5-minute moment, where the idea is for us to kind of give you a quick summary of some of the ideas that have kind of surfaced today. We've been talking at the organizational level, but what we want to also switch to is you as a person listening in. What do you want at the for yourself, and how to make flex happen for yourself? And so for today's 5-minute moment, I have two wonderful people who will be joining us. One is Heather Cluley, the other is Bryn Jones. Heather is a professor of HR development at Villanova University. She helps run Third Pass OMG 12 call series, and she's a parent of one school ager. Bryn Jones is an executive leadership and team coach. She helps run Third Pass whole life leader groups, and she's the parent of two school agers. I'm so glad you guys are here. Let me talk a little bit about what the ILAs do, and then I'm going to get you to, maybe starting with Heather, reflect on what you've heard so far. Just want to mention that these two ILAs represent our whole community of integrated life advocates. We knew we couldn't build Third Path without some smart people like Bryn and Heather to help us do our work. So if you're excited about what you're doing and you're a coach or you're a career counselor or a couples counselor, please reach out to us. We'd love to include you in our ILA community. So Heather, you've been listening in. What did you hear that maybe was new or interesting or worth underscoring before we have you talk about how to advocate for remote work? Heather, tell us.
Well, I loved how both of the leaders here are role modeling, because it's not easy to find the right formula. If you're not in a place where you have a leader that's showing you how to do this well, it's not always easy to navigate it. And in the work family realm that I'm in the diversity space where I'm teaching, I have this notion of if you have power, give power. And they're both giving power by setting that, setting the stage for this, showing people how it can work, talking about it, not in a, I'm going to go flex my time or work from home, but why I'm doing it and what it means to my family. So being open and transparent about it. So I love that.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of a conversation you and I had recently where, the alternative is that leader who hands you that project on a Friday and says, give it to me on Monday. And what I heard Greg say was, I might even make that mistake, but call me on it. Help me do a better job. Let's work together to set deadlines that really work well for us. And I'm human. And I want to make sure we all have time to get to the things we need to get to. It's really incredible role modeling. Wonderful. Thank you. Bryn, what did you hear that really was worth underscoring?
I've got a lot of notes here, Jessica. And some of the things I have written in capital letters: practice, trust, connecting as whole people, accountability to each other, intentionality and being explicit, and options, which I also put a big square around because I heard repeatedly in thinking about bridging what's important to the organization and what's important to me. It's about asking the question, what are we trying to achieve? And what are the different ways we can do it? Not just this or that, but let's open it up and see what are the different ways.
Amen to that. Wonderful, wonderful. And we're going to have Bryn, when she shares some more insights, talk a little bit about this idea that we can have too much work, and that can be a real challenge. And when you use the word practice, wow, does that come into play when we're talking about capacity for work? I feel like for next year's Third Pass 25th anniversary, and I feel like for 25 years, I've been practicing getting better at understanding what me and my team's capacity is for work, and many times failing. So we'll hear a little bit from Bryn around getting smarter around how we manage our capacity for work. So Heather, some of the people listening in today are scratching their heads. They're seeing some movement back to on-site. I certainly talked to a leader who was, thinking about going back to a 4-day on-site experience, which to me basically is almost like a 5-day on-site experience. What do you think people can do to advocate for holding on to what I call a high-performing hybrid approach?
Sure. We don't all work for an Adrienne or a Greg. So I in one of the seminars that I give, we talk about managing up. So what is your boss's perspective? What are their concerns? What are their pressures? And what are in other team members as well? But you need to get to know your boss. Maybe they're a very private person and they just don't want the life side. Maybe they're concerned about what their boss thinks or concerned about following the rules. Maybe they don't know how to train you or onboard you or work with you from offsite. So understanding it from their perspective can help a lot. And then you talk about the triple win. I think, especially for bosses who's less comfortable with this, putting it in the framework of what does this mean for my work? How will it impact you? How will it impact our clients and the organization? And really packaging it and how it's going to help your work is going to be a better sell than I need this for me because if they're really not comfortable with the private side or the work-life integration side, then really packaging it and how this is going to help the work is going to be an easier sell for them. And then the third thing is it a experiment? Is it a pilot test? When are we going to reassess whether this is working or not? So I think we should try, I'd love to try this for a while and see how it improves my productivity, because it'll give me that quiet time that I need to do focused work. But I understand if it's not working in, say, 6 weeks, we could renegotiate or re-talk about it. So I think those kind of conversations can help you re-engage with some of the flexibility that might be drawn back right now.
Really good points. And I love that experimental approach, and maybe even putting a date in the calendar
Yeah.
where even if it's going well, you really pay attention to that date as a way to kind of say, hey, this is working. So many good advice there. Wonderful, wonderful. So Bryn, I know you're smart about how to do work differently in a remote way, but I gave you the tough question about there's also this problem of capacity for work. What advice have you got for around that big, huge topic? By the way, if somebody wants to ask more about this, send Third Path an email. We've got tons of information around how to help people think smarter about capacity for work. But Bryn, some advice.
Well, I'm first going to share. So you and I had a town hall about this 2.5 years ago that you shared with me to re-listen to. And it was about capacity management. So my first offering would be, remember to come back to things that you have already identified that work for you, which that's what I was doing by listening to that. Oh yeah, I'm at a place now where I need to remember those things. So I'm always a huge fan of, Heather was talking about try this and then come back and renegotiate. So iteration and experimentation, I think, is just a fabulous way to figure out if things work. So reflecting on what's in front of you, thinking about what's important to the organization, to me, in the long term, in the short term, and then making a plan for how do I let go of things? How do I carve out space to have that quiet time? What am I going to try for the next 3 months? And then, like you're suggesting, putting time in the calendar to actually reflect back and what's working, like that planning and reflecting, and act, plan, reflect, plan, act, reflect, over and over and over. I think is one of the best ways to really figure out what works for you, what works for the organization, and again, having that explicit conversation with others around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk about that explicit conversation for a second. So everybody should know Bryn Jones is my coach. And the two of us talk quite a bit about this idea of creating space in our lives. And she's really a great practicer of this idea herself in her life, but also at gently holding me accountable of creating enough space in my life. And so when we're talking about capacity, I think having somebody in your corner to talk about what are you really reaching for? What feels like overcapacity? And how do you want to go? What does being in the better capacity look like? For me, I'm now trying to take half days on Wednesdays for myself. And by visualizing that, what I'm reaching for, and having someone like Brandon in my corner to talk about how that's going, helps me keep on practicing it in a very real way. What's getting in the way? What's making it harder? What's making it more possible? And I've learned a lot, and it really is true. So if you're someone who's having a hard time turning off work on the weekends, maybe that's the first step you're taking is, how do I step away from that pattern? What would it take to do that? Any last advice about capacity management that you've learned yourself around the benefits of getting to that place where you feel more successful about it?
Oh, it's funny, again, listening to that town hall we did 2.5 years ago, I could hear it in my voice. I'm actually over capacity right now. And so I have lots of tools and skills and people to talk to about this. And like you, it still happens. And then I need to stop and really take a hard look. So I'm a journaler. I like going back and hearing things like you shared. To be able to have a point in time to reference what it was like when it was going really well, and to remember what that felt like, what was going on, how connected I felt to my kids, how I was showing up for my clients. And for me, when I can see the benefits of my really good capacity management, showing up for others, and connected to those things, it then makes it easier for me to see what needs to happen for me to get back to that place.
Yeah, yeah. So another important lesson for those of you listening in, there will be times when you get it right around capacity management, and there'll be many times when you get it wrong around capacity management. And that is just the journey of capacity management. But what I hear Bryn say is something I've felt myself. When you have that experience of what it feels like, for example, to completely turn off work on vacation. Now there's an idea about capacity management. It feels so different. You want to do it again. And so even though we fall off the wagon, those positive experiences become very motivating of getting back on the wagon. So there might be one last thought we want to say in this 5-minute minute. Heather, you've been listening in to us talk about some of this stuff, and then I'll check in with Bryn. And then we're going to go to our town hall discussion for those of you who are live and in person today around some of these ideas. Heather, any last thoughts on our 5-minute moment?
Sure. I think both the hybrid work environment and capacity management go back to having a team that you trust. Not everybody has a team. Sometimes you are the eye, but for me, it's having open, transparent discussions about all the work and whether I feel like I'm doing more of it than others, and if it can shift. Maybe we need, better staffing. And we've moved in that direction on my team in the last year, and it's made a huge difference. But you also have to trust people to take things off your plate, which is something I've had a hard time with before, because I can do it faster and better, right? So I think leaning into your team and trusting them and having open, transparent discussions when you are taking on too much, those things can help.
Wonderful. Any last thoughts, Bryn?
Yeah, Heather just dinged something in my brain, that sometimes the overcapacity is because you're trying to set things up in the future to lessen the demands on you. And so I think it can be helpful too when you're looking at why are you over capacity, are you setting yourself up for success in the future? And if that's the case, well, then maybe it's okay to be there right now because you're putting things in place for later.
Yes. Ain't that the truth? Thank you so much. Okay, that was pretty amazing. As usual, our town hall discussions are really quite exceptional. And I heard a lot of really great themes. One about how leaders who've had a broader experience around flexibility are going to be more open to the opportunities of a hybrid workplace, and leaders who have had maybe more of a straight and narrow approach to work, where they came into the office and somebody else was responsible for family responsibilities, means they just haven't had as much exposure to the opportunity of hybrid work. And so we were talking about how do you have that courageous, compassionate, curious conversation with that leader to help them see this opportunity, because we really are at an amazing time where people like you, people who have been those work care champions, are showing us we can create a very different kind of workplace that really supports people across the life cycle as their work and life needs change, without compromising the work. That's the most important thing. We can really do our work well in this very different way. So anyways, you're seeing a couple of last slides. One to remind you that we've got some great resources for free on our website. Make sure you can check out what's those free resources, and we will also have this recording up on our website soon too. There's also lots of different ways for you to continue the journey by maybe joining our Trailblazers Facebook group or following us on social media. And don't forget to come back next month for our next Thursdays with Third Path Live podcast. And as you can see, we are a nonprofit that has really successfully built a community of role models and change agents. Help us support our free resources and expand our reach by making a donation through our website. Oh my goodness. Thank you guys so much for your inspiring stories. Thank you for being leaders who are role modeling things differently. You are also being parents who are role modeling things differently at home. And as we were talking about in the town hall, that makes a huge difference too. So for all of that, it's really just wonderful. As you listened in today, maybe I'll start with Greg. Any new thoughts about what you've heard today that made you think bigger? And then maybe Adrienne.
Two themes that have been referenced is that practicing and letting go. And I think what comes to mind is that as I practice something, I have to realize, oh, there's some of these things that I'm doing that just doesn't make sense. So I do need to let them go. And one can basically result in the other to get to the place that you really need to be.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then I'm going to come back to you in a second and ask you if you have one last piece of advice for those listening in. Adrienne, anything you learned today?
Yeah, I think I had an aha, really affirming moment where I had thought that I had to have my capacity management down by now and like check a box. And I think what you affirmed to me, Jessica, is that it is something you're always and forever working on. So thank you for that.
Oh, you are so welcome. And it is so true because work and life keep changing, right? And so I really I had a very wise leader say there's episodic overwork versus chronic overwork. Chronic overwork is the real problem. Episodic overwork is part of our lives, and we will have either because of work or life these periods, or sometimes both, where there is this episodic overwork. And by the way, this is happening in the holidays, and that's a reason why we might all be feeling a little stressed thin too. So I'm glad that was an aha moment. Greg, one last piece of advice for those listening in, and I'll give you the last word, Adrienne.
I would say for those individuals who are trying to build trust, curiosity can be a great tool to be able to help leaders who do not maybe want to envelop this kind of concept to ask questions of them, engage them in conversation, build the relationship so that there is trust, so that they can be appropriately challenged to be able to take their organization in a good direction.
Key words there. Good direction. This is where we're going to get the best talent, right, Greg? And you're after the best talent. So no wonder why you're leading the way. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Adrienne, any last words of advice?
Yeah, I would just offer a reminder to center the humans first that we're all working with on our shared teams. And when we do that, the passion and the care and the well-being is surely to follow.
Wonderful. Great words of wisdom. Thank you, everybody. That was fabulous today. Really appreciate all your wisdom.